last straw in a relationship you no longer are in. Story 1. My ex was my best friend before we started dating, and she was attracted to me long before we started dating. But I was in a different relationship then, and also, I had no idea she felt that way. Then when I broke up and she consoled me and slowly became very close to me. Eventually we started dating. Then I realized she's obsessed with me and wants constant attention no matter where I am or in what situation I am. She was really possessive as well. I mean, extremely possessive. But I didn't really mind all that because I also had started feeling for her. So I wanted to make efforts for her and keep her happy. But when my father got seriously ill and hospitalized most of the time of days were taking care of my father at the hospital, and I hoped she'd be supportive and understanding in this situation, that I can't give her that much time until my father gets better, but instead she used to get mad at me and even curse my father for getting sick and that this was all his fault. This was the last straw, and I just could not continue being with her, so I broke up. After some time, I found out that my relationship before her ended because of her. She somehow manipulated my previous GF into breaking up with me so that she could date me. Story 2. I was seeing a woman around the time the first of the new Dune movies was out in theaters. She was undoubtedly the most attractive woman I had ever been with, almost a decade younger than me. Fit, gorgeous, with that sort of feminine charm that makes you melt as she leaves lipstick on your neck. I was dating up on a way I had never achieved before. But, Jesus Christ Almighty, she was also the dumbest person I had ever met. The final straw was when she asked me about the plot to Dune before we went to see it, which I had read in college years prior. I explained the plot, which involves psychics and interstellar travel, and literal space witches. She then looks at me, cocks her head slightly and asks, "Is it based on a true story?" We didn't last much longer. Also, I'm fairly certain she was forgetting to take her birth control pills. Story 3. She constantly talked about her exes. There were about 3 that constantly came up, but it was a daily occurrence. It wasn't even in a bad way. She would just be like, "Oh, my ex did that." Or, "One time my ex and I," and even though she didn't mean it in a bad way, I took it as being compared to them and it was just meh. Asked multiple times for her to stop and never did. Story 4. Many, many moons ago, I picked up my then girlfriend at her house to bring her back to my apartment. It was a 50-minute drive. She got in the car and started talking immediately. She famously talked non-stop, which didn't bother me at first, but slowly wore on me over time. About 3 minutes from my apartment, Badfingers, No Matter What, came on. I was in a band and music was very, very important to me. I cranked up the song instinctively. It's got a banger of an intro, not realizing she was still talking without a break. She got super pissed. That was rude. I was talking. I realized that I couldn't stand it anymore and dumped her on the spot and turned around. My wife and I have the same passion for music. Story 5. Her constant berating of her mother. Her mom was a teen pregnancy, dropped out of school, never got her GED, but raised her with her dad in a decent house, sent her to a nice school, and gave her most of the things her parents had to miss out on growing up. My ex always reminded her of how stupid she was and how she never amounted to anything and was lazy. But it was mostly the intelligence thing. My ex thought she was brilliant for going to Drexel, which her mom helped pay for, to be a chemical engineer. One day after listening to this same old immature fight for the 100th time, I said, "That's a wrap," and bounced. I don't like some of my family either, but you cannot talk to people like that. Story 6. I had a boyfriend who had been previously engaged. She had passed away in a car accident a few years before I met him. He seemed to have come to terms with it when we talked about it. 6 months into our relationship, he wanted me to change my style of clothes. I was a t-shirt and jeans girl, and he wanted me to start wearing something more feminine. Nothing too drastic, just change to dress slacks and some name brand styles of ladies wear. I did start dressing up a little more, and I admit I liked the way I looked. He said things like, "Oh, that's a lot better. You remind me of my fiancé." That was creepy, and I said so. He stopped saying it. But then he started talking about my hair. I have long brunette hair. It's hard to control, and I usually kept it up in a ponytail. He wanted me to dye it jet and wear it loose, with a style. He showed me a picture he had of her and said, "Kinda like that, because that would make you look a lot more like her." He was trying to make me over in her image. I noped right out. Story 7. This is easy. 40 caliber Glock, one in the chamber, pushed up against my chest for about 10 minutes. We were going through a divorce, due to her being untreated bipolar and screwing around. After our separation, she found out I was out living my life and enjoying the company of other women, and she snapped. I ended up fighting crazy with crazy. I ended up reaching up and pushing the gun harder into my chest and told her to go ahead. That if she thought that was going to get rid of me, she was very wrong, because I was going to make a deal with the first devil I came across and I would be right back for her. She was stunned, stepped back, and lowered the gun enough for me to grab it and get the fudge out. I sat in my car for about 15 minutes just shaking. She wanted the gun back during the divorce, but the damnest thing is that the gun vanished. For all I know, bits and pieces could be scattered around various lakes and rivers. Can confirm there is nothing like having a gun pointed at you. You get to a point to where you realize you're going to pass away, and the scary part is you accept it. What I did was a Hail Mary pass at best, but it worked. Story 8. Every Thursday when she was done with college classes 10 a.m., she would go to her cousin's house to hang out. It was convenient for them because of how close her cousin was to campus, and she had most of that day free, fine, whatever. August, September, and most of October pass, and we go to her cousin's Halloween party, and when we get there, her cousin yells out, "OMGX, it's been so long since I've seen you. We need to hang out." I was so quiet that night. A brutal stealth sucker punch to the heart. Story 9. It's funny and it's wrong and we aren't connected anymore, so she won't ever see this. She fully pooped during an orgasm once. Like all over my member, all over the bed. And she's moaning the whole time with a look of pure horror on her face. I'm not freaking out at first because I've been soaked before. Then it got warmer and it didn't run. And it just sat there and my brain started screaming. I could never get that night out of my head. We couldn't have close relationship at all after because that's where my head went. I hope she's okay and happy in love, and fudge, I hope he's not good in bed, for his sake. Story 10. He couldn't be happy for me if he wasn't completely happy himself. More broadly, his emotions were always the most important ones. Also, he refused to move out of the left lane, irrespective of how many cars passed us on the right, because he felt entitled to be there. Story 11. She was going on a vacation for 2 months that I objected to. We had just gone on a 2-month vacation the summer prior, and while I was working full-time, she hadn't had a job in 2 years. I wanted to make some progress before she went on another vacation. She never relented, and when it became clear she was going, I just asked her to promise me she wouldn't be available to other men. She said she couldn't promise me anything. You could probably guess we were already rocky at this point. She ended up sleeping with a dude, and was massively disappointed when she came back, and I'd moved on with someone who would take our relationship a little more seriously. I can still hear her. "You were supposed to be my man." Well, Anna, maybe you shouldn't have gone around spreading your legs all over the world then. I dodged a bullet. It was a slow dodge, but I dodged it. Story 12. Left me in crippling pain when I was begging him to take me to the ER because he was going to a soccer game he has season passes to. I asphyxiated on my vomit and blacked out during this time and nearly passed away. I didn't have anyone else who would have helped me, and my family was many hours away because I moved for this man and my roommates were out of town. I felt afraid of calling an ambulance because I was already financially struggling. I should have just gotten an Uber or something, but I didn't want to put that liability on someone with a gig job. I made the suggestion to him as well since he didn't want to miss the game to be with me, and he made a big stink about inconveniencing an Uber Lyft driver and how inappropriate that'd be. He had been with me that entire night when I was begging to go to the hospital, and he told me to wait it out longer to see if I got better. I periodically kept asking to go in between being in and out of consciousness and vomiting everything I tried to eat or drink. Then, 5-ish hours before the game rolls around, and he said he didn't want to be stuck at the hospital before the game, and he meant to get lunch with his dad beforehand, and a whole list of other things, and that he'd come back to take me later if I waited for him to get back. He insisted he will take me if I still wanted to go when he came back, and promised he would be back for me between 7 and 8 p.m. Urged me to nurse it like I already had been for the entire day prior and get some sleep. Game starts at 3 p.m. I don't remember when it ended, but he didn't come back for me until 3 a.m., and he found me unconscious in the bathroom covered in vomit. I guess at some point I did cough it up after choking, but I blacked out and only remembered actively choking before everything went. Story 13. This was a relationship I had largely grown out of naturally. I was in therapy and she wasn't. After a year and a half, I had changed enough that something was going to give. But this is what did it. We were driving home from a vacation that was pretty meh. It was an all-day drive, and something went wrong with her clutch. She couldn't handle the stress of it and stop-and-go traffic through NYC. So I drove her car those stop-and-go traffic for a long time with a standard transmission that you couldn't shift more than every 3 minutes or so. I felt like a flipping hero. She never said thank you, never expressed gratitude in any way at all that I noticed. In her defense, she could have said something I never noticed. But like I said, I was probably fed up anyway. Story 14. When I drove 3 hours to visit him and he couldn't stop playing RuneScape long enough to spend time with me, I remember we were at the zoo and he was playing it on his phone. He had his computer set up at home to play it remotely, IDK. And when I asked him to stop, he just refused. That's when I knew it was over. Story 15. The disparity in our income was huge. I asked many times for her to quit pointing it out to me. One Sunday, our air conditioner stopped working and she once again threw up in my face that I didn't have the money to replace it. I just couldn't take the shaming anymore. I ended up finally leaving. That was the end of a 35-year relationship. Guess what? The repair on the air conditioner cost $165. Story 16. He threatened to terminate my cat. Our relationship had gotten a bit abusive by this point, with a lot of controlling violent behaviors. I had been slapped, punched, spit on, yelled at, held down for hours, and it didn't click to leave until he told me he'd terminate my cat. Something about him threatening her made me realize how far this had really gone. Story 17 was in a, didn't realize at the time, abusive, controlling relationship when I was 21. I had essentially become a prisoner in her apartment, in a different city away from my friends and family, as she would get very upset anytime I mentioned going home for a few days, and would occasionally physically block the door and scream if I tried to move her out the way. Anyway, we had an argument about shoes she had bought for me because I hadn't worn them when we went out for breakfast that. Said if I didn't appreciate them, then she'd just take them back. We argued and she left to go visit her mother, but physically locked me in the apartment as I didn't have my own key, so I couldn't go anywhere while she was away. That was enough. I realized how dangerous her behavior actually was. I packed my clothes and Xbox into my backpack, climbed down the drain pipe, we were only 2 floors up, and got the next train. Got an email from her later that evening, but just ignored it and never heard from her again. Story 18. Fish? We were already having our problems here and there, but the problem is, none of those issues were deal-breaker, just soul-sucking and stressing. I was working my way to make things right, and I can tell he was also, but sometimes pushing doesn't work. One day I was feeling bad for unrelated reasons to our relationship, and he said he would come over and cook. He did, but he did the one food that I despise the most, fish. I couldn't believe he did not remember that I hate fish so much. I didn't say anything while he was cooking. He prepared the table, and we sat. I ate the food that I hated because he cooked for me. At the end of the meal, I said there is no point in trying, even though we want this to work. Sometimes you gotta leave your comfort zone for your own sake and the others. Story 19. My wife staying up all night getting stoned and tweeting. Hear me out. For about 14 months, every bid for connection I proposed to her, she denied. She never wanted to cuddle, have close relationship, talk about anything, and didn't enjoy being in the same room with me. We used to take edibles and hang out when our relationship was great, so I would offer to do that every couple months, and she always said no. Literally anything I proposed to connect us was answered with a no, and she never proposed anything. I begged her to talk to her therapist. She ended our couples counseling sessions after only a few, about what she needed to connect with me better, and how to talk to me about. But she told me connecting with me was less important to her than anything else she had going on. One night after 14 months of this, I offered to hang out later than my bedtime and offered her an edible. She said no. I went to bed. I woke up at 2 a.m. and heard her in the living room awake. I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw she tweeted about 20 times. She said she was stoned and feeling silly. She said the most cringy, pun-based, unfunny jokes I have ever read. The culmination of her denying my bid to get a little stoned and hang out, and then seeing her dumb sense of humor and realizing I just didn't like this person anymore, I asked for a divorce the next day. Story 20. They insisted on having a movie night on Tuesdays where we only watched ironically poor titles. Nobody wanted every week, and we wanted to vary the movies. Instead of being a little butthurt and realizing other people have opinions, they doubled and tripled down on this wild fantasy of a community of friends that all do poor movie Tuesdays that they ended up losing a solid 8 or so friendships, including mine. Story 21. He wasn't willing to buy one less bottle from the package store. 10 bottles of Everclear every 3 to 4 weeks. I asked him to buy just one less, even if it meant going to the store sooner. When he refused, I knew it was time. Story 22. Receiving an expense breakdown 2 days after I returned to my home country. He pleaded with me to visit him in his home country and stay with him. I offered to rent my own apartment nearby his for the month. He insisted I stay with him at his apartment. After receiving the expense breakdown, I became triggered. I broke it off with him right then and there. To be fair, after the month-long stay, I had already assessed, observed, and evaluated that he was not boyfriend quality material for me. But I was trying to figure out a way to let him down as gently as possible. But after that expense breakdown, the breakup was at warp speed. Story 23. We had been dating for a few months and he'd acted like he was interested in a serious long-term thing, which I wasn't even initially interested in but slowly became excited at the idea of. We made plans to go see a movie on opening weekend, but he had to cancel due to something coming up. No big deal. We rescheduled for later the night of our rescheduled movie date. He called and we excitedly chatted about the movie and dinner plans for after. I took extra care into getting dolled up and distinctly remember catching a look at myself in the mirror on my way out and thinking how happy I looked. I didn't even get halfway to the theater before he me a lame text saying how sorry he is. Some minor emergency came up with a friend and he has to go tend to that. Logically, I understood and told him it's fine, but I wanted to collapse and just cry. That weekend, a mutual friend wanted to go see the movie My SO, and I had been trying to see. We made plans for all three of us to go, and My SO finally showed up. This time, I didn't even bother considering it a date and showed up in sweats LOL. We watched the entire movie, it was fun, and I began loosening up and decided maybe I was just too harsh on him. Then, on the way through the lobby, we ran into a couple heading into another showing, and it happened to be My SO's coworker. The coworker asked what we saw, our mutual friend told him, and the coworker turned to My SO and said, "It was so good you had to go see it again, huh?" My SO looked like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't even care who he saw the movie with at that point. I knew we were over 100%. Later found out he'd been hanging out with a group from work who happened to have a very attractive female friend that My SO was trying to get with. I am only angry I wasted that makeup on the first try, ha ha ha. Last I saw of this idiot, he was trudging around town in the rain with a comedically sad face because he wrecked his car and had no insurance, so I don't feel too sorry for myself, lol. Story 24. I went out scuba diving for the day with members of my scuba club who I'd known for longer than my boyfriend at the time. These particular members were all middle-aged, married men. I am 100% comfortable with them because they've earned my trust. I'd been on multiple days out with them and holidays abroad before meeting that BF. However, my BF did not trust them, which is fine. What wasn't fine was pestering me via text every 15 goddo no minutes and throwing tantrums when I didn't respond to some. I broke up with him that evening. I won't tolerate such insecurity. Story 25. We had been together a year. Things were good except the close relationship life. I knew he was, and never admitted to it. We had a good conversation about it, and he still lied the whole time. That was the last straw for me. I have a very high libido, and close relationship once every 2 weeks wasn't it for me. I politely grabbed my things and told him I was done. He proceeds to hack my email and my Facebook and post private pictures and messages of. Then he breaks into my car just to leave a note saying, "We need to talk." Then I caught him stalking me at the gym, so what did I do? I started Instacarting at his job every day for the next 2 weeks before completely moving out of state. I took pictures of him, I spoke to his bosses about the behavior, and I sent the photos to his mom. Let's just say I haven't been harassed by him anymore. Lol, stay strong, ladies. Cops literally told me to take matters into my own hands without causing harm. I think I did just that. Story 26. He took the woman he told me not to worry about on a trip to Oktoberfest instead of me because the night before he caught me secretly vaping and couldn't stop screaming at me. It didn't feel safe spend 4 days drinking with an angry man. This is the same man who berated me for hours over text because I got the wrong set of IKEA curtains. Story 27. Not a romantic relationship, but my birth mother. I waited my whole life to meet her. I was adopted internationally as an infant, and the only thing I knew about her my whole life was her name. I was fortunate I had a very amazing adoptive mother who prepared me for the reality I could face if I met her. In my mom's words, "Honey, people don't give up babies in the post-Soviet Union because things are going good. Just be ready for anything because this is a person that's come through all shades of trauma and occupation, and that does things to people." She couldn't have been more right, unfortunately. I met my biological mother at 23 years old. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was working on my accounting finals in college and laying with my baby son on my bed, I got a ping on my email from Ancestry.com. My adoptive mother had gotten the DNA testing kit a few years earlier as a Mother's Day gift for my first Mother's Day as a mom. 3 years later, I get a notification that I have an immediate family match. It turned out to be my maternal aunt who connected me to my older sister and my biological mother. I found out that I had not only an older sister but several younger siblings as well. In fact, I had a sister that was the same age as my son. I grew up in an only child household, so this was quite a wonderful bit of information to learn. I always wanted siblings, and now I had several that were mine. My egg donor and I only spoke over video call 3 times. In the last time that we spoke, she was talking about her home life with my youngest sibling and her husband. She went on to brag about committing domestic violence against her husband, which seemed to occur from both of them towards each other, and mentioned that it happened to occur right in front of my sister most times. Now that I really cannot abide. In my own life, I went through hell to save my 2 children and myself from a violent person. To say that experience had me nearly lose everything is an understatement. But the breaking point was leaving because my ex-husband exposed our daughter to violence while I was pregnant with our son. As a consequence, he never met our son and has never seen our daughter since she was 2 months old. I applied to have full custody and eventually was even granted removal from the birth certificates so that he could not pursue custody of them in the future. My mother was named as a guardian in his stead. It has been a long time and we have done a lot of healing, but I will never ever forget that experience and the impact that had on me and my family. And here is this woman talking so casually, I would even say joking about hitting her husband over the head with a frying pan in front of my little sister. I was dumbfounded, but quickly ended the call and sent her a message saying, hey, like, this is unacceptable, and I get that you've been through a lot in your life, but you need to know that the things that you said to me were wildly inappropriate, and I don't want to continue having a relationship with you because I don't want people like that in my life. I told my older sister what she said so that she could contact child protection for our younger sister in the country they live in. And that was the last time I spoke to my birth mother. I don't regret the decision for 1 second and constantly amazed that it truly does not leave a heavy feeling in my heart. I gained an amazing older sister out of it, so no loss here. Story 28. My ex dumped me because I was in a severe depressive episode, and when we went out on Valentine's Day, it was hard for me to be present and hold a conversation. I apologized to her about it, and she held my hand and said it was okay. Then a few days later, she said that was actually the nail in the coffin and dumped me. For some context, we were together for 5 years, and she completely flaked, or was late to every Valentine's date we had, because she was depressed and going through it. Story 29. Dated a girl that had some pretty unfounded jealousy trust issues. It sucked because I was pretty crazy about her. She would start acting suspicious anytime I spoke to another woman, including family members. After a couple months of that, she started questioning me like an interrogation because I had 2 empty beers on my countertop when she came over, implying that there must have been someone else with. I drank them earlier in the day while doing yard work. That was it for me. Ended it right there.